pray to, like, say, a saint or to Mary, or you approach lepers and hope that they pray for you too, that these people somehow have more efficacious way of getting through to God and getting your prayers answered, right? That in some ways, medieval people really think it's a good idea to have someone go to God on your behalf, right? And so they really have this emphasis that lepers, there's something special about them. Although at the same time, they're really, really afraid of them. And I'll show you what they did. This is what actually we know it's from. It's infected blood, and you can get rid of it. But this is a picture of a medieval leper. This is probably the most famous depiction of medieval lepers. And if you notice, the poor guy doesn't have a hand, right? And his face it's hard to see in the slide, but his face is definitely marred. And a lot of times you'll see them, they wear a cowl, probably because they've lost their ears, and these hats and all of this. But if you notice, he has a bell. You see, his bell is very big, right? It's a kind of a jumbo bell. I don't think that they were all carrying jumbo bells like that, but the bell is a sign of a leper. And that's because wherever lepers went, they were made to ring bells so everyone could clear away from them before they even got there. So if you can imagine being a leper, you have this horrible disease, and then you have to ring a bell to keep everybody away from you because people are so afraid of catching the disease. On top of it, people often thought in the Middle Ages that lepers had gotten the disease because of lust, and they associated leprosy with sexually transmitted diseases. Now, we now know it has nothing to do with that. It's not a sexually transmitted disease. But medieval people thought this, and they associated the idea that lepers may have been lepers because they deserved it, because they were sinful in a sexual way. They committed acts of lust. And so these lepers, they really are on the outs in society. Now you can understand why these hospitals often said, no lepers, you won't take any lepers. They are not allowed in our hospital, because they would have been afraid that people would come into the hospital and infect people or cause problems. Now, normally in hospitals that are treating the sick, they wouldn't be so much worried about the sick in some ways, because most people who went to a hospital, the assumption is they've gone there to die. In the Middle Ages, if you're sick and you go to a hospital for sick people, you're going there so you can have essentially palliative care, the end of life care, right? Someone's going to take care of you as you die. And it's very interesting. I tried really hard to find slides because there's a famous case of this in Flanders, very famous hospital that has all these very scary frescoes, these wall paintings that are like kind of showing people, you better atone for your sins because you're going to go to hell, right, if you don't do that, because the assumption is, well, they're on their deathbeds, and if they have any sins remaining they haven't confessed, we got to convince them to do it because we got to help make sure they go to heaven. So these frescoes can seem really kind of frightening and like a really mean thing to do to someone as they die, but the people who put them up, they obviously thought, oh, we're helping these people, right? We're going to motivate them, help remind them and motivate them they need to confess their sins before they die, so they have a better chance of going to heaven. So the concern then with lepers is not so much the sick, it's the caretakers. The people who took care of the sick in these hospitals, they want to catch leprosy by caring for lepers too, so they don't want them there. So what would happen is lepers often had their own separate houses or kind of communities. Sometimes they're called leper hospitals, kind of depends. And there would be people who would go and serve the lepers. And I just lifted a quotation from a statement from one of these documents in which someone kind of says, I'm going to go into a leper house. Because if you did this, you're actually making yourself dead to the world. Because do you really want to, if you're a medieval person, do you really want to be around the person who hangs out with the lepers? No, because they're going to give you that disease, right? And you don't want them around. So when you make that decision that you're going to go and serve the lepers, you're cutting yourself off from everybody else. You're going to go be with the lepers and that's it. You're considered like a leper yourself. And so people often would kind of make statements, almost like a will almost. And a common phrase in these is that they go to serve God and his poor rather than vainglory in this world. In other words, these are people who said, I'm going to go hang out with these very frightening people and I'm going to help them because that's what I should do as a good Christian, right? And I think that this is a good example of, people used to say, oh, this is empty rhetoric. So, all the people used to say, oh, it's just because people are worried about their salvation. They just say, oh, this is empty rhetoric, empty rhetoric. I mean, at least for me, I have a hard time believing that's empty rhetoric. This is a case where you're really putting yourself in grave danger from your point of view to go help somebody. I don't think you do that just to get salvation. I mean, maybe it's possible, but I'm not sure you can say that they're all explainable that way. Others have pointed out that people may have done this because you did at least ensure yourself what we would call material safety. You ensure you're going to have lodging and food and things like that. that probably did motivate some people who were very poor to go and serve lepers, right? They might have had a better life and might have been willing to risk it. But these leper houses are very interesting. These are eventually what become leper colonies, right? Which you may know from a more modern period, because this remains a problem in the West. And I'm going to end by giving you a very specific example of a woman who is known for being very charitable, Mary Lee. And she lived, as you can see, in the late 12th century, early 13th century. And one thing I will note is she actually doesn't live to be very old, right? So I think she's a nice example because she's pretty young in her activities. We know about her because a man named Jacques de Vitry wrote about her. And he wrote about her because he said, people should know that she should be a saint, right? He really holds her up as this great model. And so this is partly how we know her, but we also have some other things about her. She lived in Flanders, which is like kind of roughly where modern day Belgium is, in a city called Nivelles, which is not really important anymore, but it was important in the Middle Ages. And she was widowed at a relatively young age, and she said, I'm going to go and we're going to found a leper hospital, and I'm going to take care of lepers. Right? And so she made this very conscious decision. She also was a beguine, and this is a group that formed for women, because most of the groups I think I've been talking about are men, so I thought, guys mentioned that women were also, of course, charitable in this period too. And in these urban centers, women didn't really have confraternities usually, they couldn't really participate. And so the other problem a lot of women had who were very, very religious was that there were fewer and fewer places in convents. And this is one of the great mysteries of the Middle Ages that we haven't quite fully explained. For some reason, at a certain point, by the time about the 12th, 13th century, people seem to stop thinking that women's prayer is as efficacious as male prayer, and that female houses aren't as well supported. There are fewer female houses, they're small, but there's still lots of women who have kind of a desire to have that kind of lifestyle. And the beguines may be one kind of response to this. The beguines were women who took vows of poverty, and they would live together in groups in cities, and they would carry out charity. And Mary did this, and she's very well known in her community for all of her charitable acts. And this is another way of also saying that she might have been a way of motivating people to carry out charitable acts. She's living in a period when we start to get more lives of lay people like her, who are doing kind of heroic things to help others. And for that reason, they begin to be recognized as saints. It was actually pretty unusual to have lay saints earlier than this. But now this is a period when we start to see more and more lay saints like her. And that this, once that people start to recognize, oh, this person could be a saint, they're a lay person, and they write about them, this may have inspired other people in the communities around there to want to also, right, be like those people, that these could be models. Maybe you can't be as good as Mary, or do be as, self-sacrificing as her, but, she's a nice model to help you be a good person, right? So hopefully, this has given you some idea about charity here in the Middle Ages. And I just end with like a hospital scene to kind of give you an idea here. That you have the greedy merchant here, and look where this little baby, people always think it's a little baby, but it's actually his soul. You see the demons and devils taking his soul away? Whereas up here, we have the nice angels come to take this guy's soul, right? So we have the happy picture and then the bad picture. So I'll end with that, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Garver, for joining us. Were there any questions before we wrap it up? Or? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming. And actually, that presentation was a nice segue. Tomorrow, there's a team of History Club students participating in a water walk to raise money to build a library in Nigeria, Tanzania. So if you want to stop by and you're able to sponsor us, that would be great. But yeah, Jesse, do you have any